it's an amazing thing, actually, to sort of.
Good morning. My name is Chuck Braverman. I'm the moderator of Westdoc Online, and this is episode number 14, which is kind of amazing to me. And today it is my great pleasure to have the series executive producer of American Masters, Mr. Michael Kantor, as our guest. I hear audio going on in the background, which I'm going to have to stop here somehow. Oh, I know what that is. That's terrible. Hold on, Michael. We're going to fix this right away. Hold on. Well, that's the pleasure of going live. I had my playback going in the background, and I didn't want the feedback to go the whole time. But I hope you're still there and we're still watching. So let's introduce series executive producer Michael Kantor. Welcome to our show.
Thanks so much, Chuck. Nice to be here.
It's good to have you. That was a different opening when I was trying to figure. I was hearing the music going on in the background. I'm thinking, wow.
The techno tumble.
Yes, you can tell now we actually are live. So this is a reminder to anybody who is watching this live. It's 9:30 in the morning on the West Coast, 12:30 on the East Coast. It's 4:30 or 5:30 in the UK. We've been trying through Twitter or through, I'm going to try email today if you have any questions for Michael about American Masters or PBS. You can email me. Try email chuck@westdoconline.com, or you can try Twitter. Use the hashtag WestDocOnline. Michael, it is a pleasure to have you here, and not because we've met a couple of times, but because American Masters is one of my favorite series. I'm doing a little research. I'm sort of amazed at the number of people and that the show has profiled over the years. The series started in 1986. The series has 72 Emmy nominations and 28 awards. It's now in its 30th season on PBS. Is that correct?
32nd season.
32nd. Well, so that the press that I'm looking at is you probably have 172 Emmy nominations now. And some of the people, I'll just go on a little bit. Some of the people that you've profiled on your series are Georgia O'Keeffe, James Baldwin, Martha Graham, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Andy Warhol, Sidney Poitier, Leonard Bernstein, Johnny Carson, Albert Einstein. I mean, the names go on and on. Bill T. Jones, Lucille Ball, Paul Simon, Richard Avedon, John Cassavetes, Ella Fitzgerald.
Quite a library.
Quite a library, quite a series. How did you end up at American Masters? Do you want to tell us a little bit maybe about your background and about, how did you get there?
So Susan Lacey created the series in 1986, and I had the great pleasure of producing and directing an American Masters in 2001 on Quincy Jones. And I always thought, well, Susan has the best job in the world. If ever there's a chance that I could do what she's doing, I'd aspire to that. And in 2014, I was lucky enough to get the chance. Previous to working on an American Masters, I'd worked on a film that ended up on HBO with Stephen Ives on the Cornerstone Theater Company. I'd worked under what I call the Ken Burns umbrella, where Ken was executive producing A History of the West that Steve Ives also directed, and I produced that. That was a long-form 8-part, 12-hour series. And I hung out my own shingle, Ghostlight Films, in 1996, and first produced a film for Bravo on Quincy that then led to the American Masters. So prior to joining American Masters as executive producer, kind of my bread and butter were the long form historical documentaries, like kind of in the Ken and Rick Burns mode. I did a history of Broadway called Broadway, the American Musical, that Julie Andrews hosted. I did a history of comedy that Billy Crystal hosted and Amy Sedaris narrated. And then most recently, I did a 3-part history of superheroes with Lee F. Schreiber. So that's a quick look at my work as an independent filmmaker before coming here.
Can we go backwards a little bit even before that? I'm just wondering, could you give our viewers a little bit of your background? How did you work your way up to be producing these shows in the first place? I mean, what were you doing? What's your background?
Sure. I was raised, my dad's a doctor and my mom works with the elderly. And when I got to college, I just discovered theater, became a theater bug, and got a graduate degree as a theater director where Alan Schneider, who's a great director of Edward Albee and Samuel Beckett and kind of modernist playwrights were. And I was actually directing a piece of site-specific theater in San Diego on Charles Lindbergh. Lindbergh, of course, built the Spirit of St. Louis in San Diego before flying the Atlantic, famously in 1927. And Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill had written a cantata about man conquering nature, crossing the Atlantic, rather. And I staged that. And right at that same time, Steve Ives of Insignia Films was leaving Ken Burns's Civil War series to create his own American experience on Charles Lindbergh. So I signed on for that, and that was my entry into the world of documentaries in the late 1980s.
And did you have any film background? How did you know?
Yeah, I was just always of the mind that so many of the great theater directors ended up doing film as well, whether it was Orson Welles or Sergei Eisenstein, that there was a natural affinity between theater and feature film. And I thought, I really need to learn the mechanics of film before I tried my hand at a feature film. And then along the way, I got so interested in documentary, because for me, a documentary is kind of like standing up in front of a class and giving your oral report. But 1 million or 2 million or 15 million people can enjoy it and learn from it. That I never kind of followed my dream to do both theater and feature films. And I've been very happy here in this kind of middle ground where, of course, in historical documentaries, you work with a number of great actors doing voiceovers. So at first I was specializing in working with the Hector Elizondos and the Laura Derns and Wes Studi and John Lithgow and Matthew Broderick, those types of folks who also straddled the line between theater and film and documentary. And so it was natural for me when I really went after my first big project to do a history of theater, a history of Broadway, which I felt I was uniquely positioned to tell that story.
So when you mention theatrical film, I immediately look at your bio and it mentions American Masters Pictures. Is that an actual theatrical distribution plan of taking some of your pictures to the theaters, or what is that?
So yeah, interestingly, I married into a family of feature filmmakers, and my in-laws, Edie and Eli Landau, had taken stage pieces and made them into motion pictures. Among them, Katharine Hepburn appears in Edward Albee's A Delicate Balance. So those kind of shows. So I was always interested in that world of indie theatrical type of filmmaking. And it was natural. There's sort of a wave, in my opinion, of putting the kinds of films that American Masters does into art house cinemas around the country. Whether it's 20 Feet from Stardom and the Amy Winehouse films, which won the Oscar, or most recently our Hedy Lamarr film, there's a strong market for these kind of films to play in hundreds of markets around the country. So we created a banner we called American Masters Pictures. And again, I told the story about my in-laws. I chose the word pictures because my mother-in-law always refers to a movie as, oh, Titanic, that's a big picture. Or, you know, I just saw this movie last week. It was a little picture, but I really liked it. And to me, the word pictures suggests theatrical, more so than films. You know, everyone's kind of co-opted the word film. Even if you're making a film with your iPhone. But pictures suggests a golden age of movie theater going. So that's where we're at with American Masters Pictures. And right now, actually, our film on Itzhak Perlman is playing Itzhak in theaters around the country under that banner. And coming this fall is one on Gary Winogrand, a photographer. So that debuted at the South by Southwest Film Festival. So we're keen to put our films in every possible platform.
Well, now you've mentioned Hedy and Itzhak. Why don't we let's take a look at Hedy, and so we'll have an idea about what we're talking about here.
One day in the summer of 1940, a shipload of children was torpedoed. All hands lost, including 83 children. At the time, the German U-boats were on the verge of winning the war. They seemed to be unsinkable because they easily outmaneuvered the outdated British torpedoes. In times of crisis, most of us feel powerless. But a few discover in themselves unexpected strength. And Hedy being Hedy, she said, I'm going to do something about that.
So in this article, Hedy says, I got the idea for my invention when I tried to think of some way to even the balance for the British. A radio-controlled torpedo, I thought, would do it.
A torpedo launched on a given trajectory might need to be changed, redirected. You want, ideally, your launching boat or your submarine to communicate with the torpedo.
The problem is you can't control radio communications. They're not secure.
Your enemy, if they're smart, finds the frequency with which you're talking to the torpedo and jams it.
Jamming. The Germans fill the air with radio interference. Interference.
She came up with the idea of a secret way of guiding that torpedo to the target that couldn't be interrupted, that couldn't be jammed, that couldn't be messed with. It was secret.
Instead of just one transmit frequency communicating, she said, what if we change those frequencies constantly in sync with each other? Frequency hopping.
You couldn't jam it because you'd only jam a split second of it in a single frequency.
So frequency change, frequency hop, frequency hop, frequency hop.
That concept, secure radio communications, was brilliant.
It's funny watching this clip in out of context, so to speak, because you know, it looks like it's a Nova show or a science show, when in fact I've seen the Hedy Lamarr film because it was submitted to the Academy this last year, and it's just a wonderful biography. It's a great film, and the contradiction in terms of this very glamorous, beautiful movie star with her, you know, at night and inventing stuff like this is amazing.
Yeah, I happen actually to have with me this card, which is the poster image, and there she is in all of her glamour, surrounded by the schematic of her invention. So she's in a way a classic American master, where we all know something about her. Some people have loved her films, but we know almost nothing about the real life story and her her genius, which wasn't captured on film for science and technology, and how she struggled to pursue that at the time, given that she was a beautiful woman.
So, having said that, now, how do you define the shows that you're looking for? We've talked about the list of some of the people that profiled: Bob Dylan, Cassavetes, Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Gehry, Woody Guthrie, Jimi Hendrix, and the list goes on and on. What's coming up? What are you looking for?
So there's no absolute secret formula where you fill in little bubbles and then you're an American master. But basically, it's cultural leaders. It's people. We have a story coming up this summer about Ted Williams, a baseball player, and why I could use his particular story. People don't know he was Mexican American. They don't know about his serving in 2 different wars, his expertise as a world champion fly fisherman, as well as, of course, being the greatest hitter that baseball ever saw. So there's all these different layers to his story, and his relationship to the press is something that, of course, is really interesting and resonant in terms of today's stories. So when filmmakers come in and I talk to them about what we're looking for, it's 2 parts. One is diversity. And diversity is not just simply for the sake of having a broad sense. Let me see if I actually have it here. I've got it on my phone. I have this great quote that was written in the New York Times last week that I've been reading to everyone I know. It's from a city college professor in New York named Elizabeth Mazzola. It's very quick. She wrote, "Diversity is the loftiest of goals. Being able to understand someone radically different and appreciate what you cannot know for yourself is what art, philosophy, and literature all help us to do, sharpening our sensitivity to what's outside our narrow experience." So for me, that's the goal in diversity, is not to simply celebrate, people we know and pat ourselves on the back. Oh, I love their work, so I want to see more of it. But hopefully to learn about the things that you don't already know and be surprised by them, of course, and appreciate them and enjoy them, enjoy the entertainment part of them. So diversity is one big factor. Another thing that I mention is it's always really nice to do films on people, American masters, who are living. It helps create what I call a process film instead of a historical document. And so you're not limited only to the materials that you can find that exist. You can watch them paint a painting or choreograph a dance or shoot a film. So those are 2 kind of interesting priorities. That's not to say we're not keen to tell the stories of the Hedy Lamars and the Sammy Davis Jr.'s, but overall, those are sort of driving mission points for us.
So let's take a look at one of the non-living samples of American masters in Ted Williams. Here we go, a trailer for Ted Williams.
I like the anticipation. I guess that was it, the anticipation of what might happen.
He was almost a godlike figure.
He's a baseball god.
It was a beauty to watch.
His swing was a work of art.
His bat being the brush and Fenway Park is the canvas. He was obsessed with hitting.
He was so focused, and when you're that focused, you can't really be a great husband. When you're that focused, you're not really a great father.
He actively concealed that he was Mexican American.
Ted Williams' parents never saw him play a single game of Major League Baseball.
He had a boiling anger.
The world hates me, everybody's against me, and I'm gonna show them.
He said in order to hit 400, he says you gotta be loose.
When he walked in the room, even if you didn't know one thing about baseball, you'd say, "That's somebody. Who's that?"
Any sport, anything really, whether it be tying a fly, he wanted to be the best.
I got down too low, and I got hit with small ground fire.
The plane was on fire.
I said, "Oh, for the goddamn Christ,
It's the time old Teddy Ballgame needs you.
So I said, "You are John Wayne." And he goes, "Yeah, I know it."
It is really, really difficult to be the queen on the chessboard.
When people criticized him, he lashed out at them.
I think he was lonely. I think that he had a difficulty in making attachments.
It was not that big a crowd that day, only about 10,000. But they were all standing, and you knew what they wanted. And can you deliver in that situation?
He wasn't the kind of person that would go, "Oh, I'm sorry. Come here, I'll give you a hug." Well, God damn it, why are you mad? Why are you upset? What happened?
And his hands were bleeding.
Perhaps one day we might see him again.
Everything about him is interesting in this gnarled, difficult way. What's the matter with him? What do you constantly ask about that? What's wrong with this guy? What a weirdo. What a great hitter.
Well, that
So
looks
that-
wonderful.
Oh, thanks. So that project was brought to us by a producer, Albert M. Tapper, and a filmmaker, Nick Davis, and we were happy to work with them to expand the number of sports figures in the American Masters catalog. To date, we've done a history profile, rather, of Billie Jean King, which was really about gender equality at some level, and another film on the great tennis player Althea Gibson, which was about racial issues. So the Ted Williams film takes us out of simply doing films about tennis players and looks at the issues that you just heard in that film. And I just want to reiterate, American Masters, unlike many or some other public television series, does all kinds of films in the sense of acquisitions. Someone's working on a film, they think it might be right, please send it to us. Co-productions, where we'll team with another company and create it. And in-house productions, which we do ourselves, like the Sammy Davis Jr. film. But two things. I wanted to credit Alexandra Dean and Adam Hagiag for the Hedy Lamarr film, because all credit due to those filmmakers who created that beautiful piece. And they're really responsible for the 73 Emmy nominations across the board that American Masters likes to boast of.
So, watching the Ted Williams film, which I'm certainly going to watch when I get a copy or when it's on the air, brings me to the question that I've always wondered, and I assumed, does it cost PBS or productions that are headed to PBS less money to buy stock footage than if it was on ABC, NBC, Discovery, or because it's PBS, you would think maybe they get a break, blah, blah, blah. Yes, no, maybe?
I think many of us at public television have tried to perfect the pitch to everyone, to publishers, to say, hey, please send us a book for free so we can read up on that particular subject. Or if we go to film in a park, to the park rangers, pardon me, can you come in early and let us into the park so we can film a sunrise? And I think we do the same with archival licensors. Pardon me, I'm just going to have a sip of water. Where we say, hey, there is educational value to this. We're using tax dollars here. We're frugal. We're careful about how we use it. So please help us out as best you can.
And is that effective? Yeah.
I think it depends on the individual producer. I think it is effective. I think public television is, according to these various polls, the most trusted institution in America. Certainly more trusted than our government, but trusted in a way that I think people are proud to share their materials with us in a way that they don't purely commercially. And I think archivists are thrilled when their material is given, is showcased on public television. So I think there's a good reason. Also, archivists are comfortable doing what we call step-up deals, where if something only airs on public television, they give you this amazing rate, but they know that if it's going to be in theaters, like the Hedy Lamarr film or the Itzhak Perlman film, they'll charge a slightly more, more commercially oriented rate.
What are the budgets, can you say, for a range of budgets for American Masters show?
Yeah, I mean, our budgets range from literally zero. There's a number of films that either come with a corporate sponsor or the filmmaker has found all the money that they needed to make the film, and they simply want to share it with as many people as possible, and they want to use this trusted platform of public television to, I don't know the exact number for the Bob Dylan film, which was a 4-hour film, but it's multi-million-dollar projects and sort of everywhere in between.
I lost my train of thought for a second.
Well, for the record, I mean, I would say we're also really thrilled to find partners. I think in public television, the key is not to say we're going it alone, we're doing this ourselves, but to find both funding partners and filmmaking partners. And the National Endowment of Humanities, in particular, has become a really special partner. They've funded, among other films, our Itzhak film and our Sammy Davis film with major production grants. So it speaks to their belief that we're telling these stories in a way that is not simply entertaining, but educational and beneficial to open up discussions about what's going on. So in terms of funding, many times people who are applying to the National Endowment of Humanities or another major granting organization will come to us and say, hey, do you believe in this enough to support us? Come in on that grant with us or develop it with us. And depending on the project, we're happy to.
So if I walked in the door with a corporation that was appropriate for XYZ subject, what are the restrictions or what do they get? What can I offer the corporation for their whatever contribution?
Well, I'm pretty sure it's online, but public television has something they call the Red Book that details the restrictions and the abilities to promote on what are not advertisements, but are called spots. That's what I call them anyway, at the beginning of an end of a program. And depending on how much either an individual foundation or a corporation wants to put into a film and support it with, it determines whether they can have 15 seconds or 30 seconds or simply a 5-second mention. And all that is laid out by rules that are not particular to any individual PBS station, but it's the whole network that I think it's mandated by law how the transparency of funding is reflected. And that's key to public television is all the funders have to be referenced. It's entirely transparent.
Has the trend to cord cutting and streaming, how has that affected American Masters and or PBS?
It's a great question. I have 3 kids and they don't watch television as I do or we do collectively. And so we have our eye on the various digital platforms. We have a podcast, the American Masters podcast, that's had 2 seasons. The first season was focusing on women on women. Gloria Steinem talking about Marilyn Monroe, for instance, or Lena Horne talking about breaking into Hollywood. And the second season was about revolutionary writers. So Mel Brooks spoke about his work, and Margaret Cho came on and talked about her work, and so forth. So the podcast is one area. We've begun to do digital-only shorts, and we're developing that aspect of both social media and short projects for online as fast as we can, because they're geared toward audiences that don't look at television. They're only looking at their mobile devices or computer screens, and we want to reach everyone.
And just before the show went live here, we were discussing what is on PBS now streaming. Hetty may or may not be. It was, and it may have moved on. Did you say it was on Netflix now, maybe, in addition to?
Hetty is currently streaming too, streaming on on PBS.org for free as part of what we call a catch-up period. That's what the Europeans use. So it's usually about a month of free streaming. So if you miss the show, you can watch it on your computer or, connect it to your screen that way. And then public television has a relatively new membership video on demand service called Passport. So if you wanted to see Downton Abbey or other programs that you missed and that are still under license to public television, you can go there and see Hedy Lamarr and our other programs. Hedy happens to have been picked up by Netflix, so you could go there and see it as well. So that's in keeping with our mantra. The WNET, Channel 13 here in New York's slogan is Media with Impact. And we want to be on as many platforms in as many areas telling these stories as we can.
I'd like to take a look at the Itzhak clip because I think the clip is so exciting and interesting, and I haven't seen the show, but let's take a quick...
So while you're queuing that up, Itzhak is in theaters around the country now. It will air on public television in October. It's a film by Allison Chernick. It's a co-production between her company and ours. And it's proudly under the American Masters Pictures banner. And my guess is if we supplied a trailer, you'll see that banner with its little sound slate click in just a minute.
German, French, and Jewish.
Jewish violin. Show me a Jewish violin. Anything that happened in my childhood had to do with yes practice, no practice. Maybe they thought, you have a talent, use it, because you're not going to be a tennis player. People who heard me play said, oh, yeah, we're very nice, but he's disabled.
I think the question in some people's minds was the fact that he walked with crutches. They called it wrong. They really called it wrong.
He approaches music the way he approaches everything in life, with passion and with joy.
Let the violin sound.
It was like fireworks. Boom, 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 boom. Do you find as you're getting older, you don't like anybody?
Toby was blown away by Itzhak's playing, and she was a goner.
I was a goner.
Goner.
I was.
The people who came to Auschwitz, they came always with a violin.
In other words, this was strictly for survival.
He got a gift, because what he's doing there it's not music. This is playing with a violin.
Oi, that's right.
Oi, so yeah, Itzhak, if you're ever with him and if you see the film, you'll see is a larger-than-life character, and his genius, his God-given talent, of course, millions of hours of practice, just transport you. And I think Allison Chernick, the filmmaker, managed to be trusted by both Itzhak and his wife Toby in a way so that she accompanies them to Shea Stadium and to Madison Square Garden and to meeting the Israeli Prime Minister and so forth. So it's a behind-the-scenes look at a very special person.
And I don't really want to bail out of this without running the Sammy clip because I was a huge fan of Sammy's. And do you want to give us a brief introduction to this show? When is this show coming up?
Sammy Davis Jr., it won't air on public television probably till next year. It's playing in festivals around the country, and it's likely to come to your neighborhood momentarily if it hasn't already. Sammy was a favorite of mine. I didn't know that much about his life story. I hadn't actually, prior to working on this film, read either of his two autobiographies, most famously the Yes, I Can story. But I knew that he'd started his career in blackface. I also knew that he was the first African-American to be invited to sleep in the Lincoln bedroom at the White House, which when it happened in the early 1970s, and Richard Nixon invited him. Just think about that, from the time that our country was created until the 1970s. That there were a lot of great stories tied to his life that also would complement his remarkable work. I mean, many people refer to him as the greatest entertainer of the 20th century. He might not have been the greatest individual singer or the greatest dancer or the greatest comedian, but put it all together, and he was an experience unlike anyone else in terms of when you saw him in person, certainly. So here's the trailer for Sammy, and hope you get to see it in theaters or on television soon.
I'm colored, Jewish, and Puerto Rican. When I move into a neighborhood, I wipe it out.
Sammy Davis Jr.'s whole life was about confronting obstacles.
Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles, come back and dance.
His gift was his talent. The curse was being black in America.
It's no fun to walk into a place you're going to play and be told that we've had 14 bomb threats.
Even if you win, you don't win.
He said, these people are going to love me as an entertainer no matter how much they may hate me as a black.
If I could have lived in the 20s with Valentino, I would have had the leopards on a leash, you know, walking down the street.
Sammy was show business from the tip of his toes to the top of his head.
If you played it for her, you can play it for me, you understand?
Sammy's like, I'm a black guy, but I'm gonna imitate a white guy.
You dirty rat.
This was really groundbreaking at the time he did it.
Hanging out with Sinatra and those guys increased his cool factor.
He's one of the boys.
We stick together like glue.
Sammy saw himself as somebody who was breaking new ground for black people, but there was definitely the perception that he was a sellout.
Anytime you walk down the street and your own people turn you away, then all the money, the diamonds, the fame, the fortune mean absolutely nothing.
He couldn't be accepted in the white community. He couldn't be accepted in the black community, but he had a vision for himself that was bigger than white or black.
Now, I would like to sing, if you would like for me to sing.
And the kiss was his idea.
1, 2, 3.
He was bigger than life. He was funny, he was smart, he was curious, he was loving, he was self-destructive.
He, again and again, will say, I'm not going to do it your way.
I was always convinced he was going to die on stage because it was the only place he was safe.
There were things about him that would infuriate you. There were other things about him that would make you stand up and applaud him.
He was a wonderful, one-of-a-kind comet that flew past the Earth way too quickly.
So this was a project originally conceptualized by writer Lawrence Maslin, and in part by myself, produced by Sally Rosenthal, directed by Sam Pollard, in which it feels to me like the pieces just came together. And very quickly, people like Jerry Lewis, before he passed away, Whoopi Goldberg and Billy Crystal and others, all wanted to tell their perspective on Sammy. And I think it's both intimate in the sense of you learn about why Sammy embraced Judaism and how he felt about never having gone to school ever, along with the big picture of just really enjoying the poetry in motion that was Sammy Davis.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing it. I think I mentioned you before, when I was a teenager, I actually met him. And by met him, I mean actually met him. My brother, who's an actor, my younger brother, was starring in The Hole in the Head with Jesse White at the Los Angeles Playhouse, and Sammy came by during the run that he had at that time. I think we had seen him at the Huntington Hartford Theater on Vine, and we saw his one-man show, which was spectacular. And then he had come by the show, and really probably to say hello to Jesse White, who, you know, but
everyone has a
gracious.
Where this film debuted at the Toronto Film Festival, and so many people have a Sammy story, whether it was they were in a store and Sammy came in to buy a watch, or they bumped into him after a show, or he came to a benefit. It's remarkable how many people he touched. He died at 64, and he was burning the candle at both ends from the day, from age 3 onward. So I think people will enjoy that film.
Do you want to briefly, before we sign off, just say what the best way is again to filmmakers if they are interested in submitting something to you? What do you suggest?
You bet. Well, as you can see behind as people walk by, we have an open floor plan at WNET, and I like to joke that if I had a door, it would be open. So people can just email me directly at my email address is kantorm, Kantorm @13.org. But what I really ask for from filmmakers and producers is not just an idea. I really would like to see a treatment, a well thought through treatment as to not only how a filmmaker would tell the story, but why they are the perfect filmmaker to tell this story. I think that kind of match of subject with passionate filmmaker is really important to the whole project. And also a budget, because if you haven't really thought through what music or clips or location shooting is going to cost, then you should do that before we start to knock ideas around. So if people think, having seen, please do a little bit of homework. Having seen some of our projects, go to our website, pbs.org/American Masters. Check out the podcast, check out our digital offerings, and then I'm happy to talk to you about any and all great ideas.
Well, thank you so much, Michael Kantor, series executive producer of American Masters. It's been a great pleasure having you on the show, and I hope that people will, if they don't already know about it, they certainly should know everything there is to know about this series because it's such a pleasure. Our next show. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. If you're online, come visit the website. You'll see everything there. But before you go, thank you, Chuck. I really appreciate the chance.
Well, it's my pleasure. And hang around for a minute as I log off here. We'll see you 2 weeks from today, hopefully, or online at www.westdoconline.com. Thank you again, Michael Kantor.